Thank you very much, Madam President. Appreciate the kind introduction, and good morning to all of you, or as they say there in Saipan, half a day. And it sounds like you're all having a wonderful time. And I really appreciate the kind invitation extended to me on behalf of APP and Jane in particular. My only regret is that I could not be there with you in person, but I'm sure you all know by now that the Port of Long Beach is more than well represented with our Commission President, Sharon Weissman, Commission Secretary Bonnie Lowenthal, and of course, your new APP President, who is our Vice President on the Harbor Commission, Bobby Olvera. So again, it's a great pleasure to join you all. What I'd like to do before we launch into what the Supply Chain Information Highway is, what it does, and how we believe it's going to be a game changer for the industry, not just the port sector, but the broader supply chain. I'd like to do some scene setting and walk you through why this digital initiative is more important and more necessary today than ever before. So let me see if I can pull up my slides so that I can walk you through this. Let me begin with our cargo volumes. It's no surprise that the experience that every port across the country and the Western Hemisphere has faced as a result of the pandemic has been similar. For us, this cargo wave, this tsunami of cargo that commenced in the summer of 2020, catapulted us not just to a record year in 2020, but also in 2021. And so far in the year 2022, we are again on a pace to set another record in container volumes by TEU. In fact, from January through August, we are about 4 percentage points above 2021. So while we may not pierce the 10 million TEU mark, we will again set another record. And again, just demonstrative of the record demand for imports that was driven by the pandemic. I say this because all of you have probably seen the reports of how the pandemic created and triggered this historic demand for imports. And it all began in 2020 as folks were confined to their homes, unable to spend their discretionary funds on restaurants and ball games, entertainment. So many of us sat at home, and either to make our stay there comfortable by ordering home improvement goods or furniture or buying things online, there was it triggered this tsunami of cargo that again began for us here in Long Beach in the summer of 2020 and continued through 2021 and continues through this year in 2022. But that record demand all happened at the same time that the same pandemic constrained capacity up and down the supply chain. And this is why this image is so telling. In fact, in January of this year, the number of ships at anchor, these were container ships that were unable to come to berth and be unloaded as a result of the lack of berth space and really the lack of terminal capacity. That number, it actually peaked at 109. Now, thankfully, thanks to the partnership with Marine Exchange and PMA ILWU, we were able to bring that number down by dispersing container ships across the Pacific. As of this morning, there were only 18 container ships at anchor, which is a better number. But a lot of folks asked us, what was normal pre-pandemic levels? And the answer is 0. So this is an illustration of what we've had to respond to. And the reason we had so many ships at anchor is because of this. Our terminals were fully subscribed. In fact, some of our terminals reported being at 110% capacity, which is unheard of. And what that means is that our terminals were full, and they actually had to find more space inside their terminal yards, inside their terminals, just to accommodate these additional boxes. And so what you see here is a combination of ships being held on water for longer. So they're effectively serving as warehouses on water. And now we have these containers piling up inside the terminal. And again, these are terminals that are customarily used for throughput, not necessarily storage, but they were effectively being used as storage due to the high demand. But the reason for that is this. Within 75 miles of the Southern California Port Complex, there are 2 billion square feet of warehouse and distribution center space. That's 2 billion with a B. And believe it or not, that's still that vast amount of warehouse and distribution center capacity space was not sufficient to be able to accommodate these record numbers of volumes. And it is for this reason that containers were piling up inside the port terminals, spending 3 to 4 times longer than usual, and the reason why ships were on the water awaiting a berth. In addition to that, there was a lot of collateral impact. Many of you are familiar with this important piece of equipment in the supply chain. Chassis were in short supply. The reason for that is because a lot of these chassis that were customarily in circulation and moving containers from the port terminals to the inland yards, they were now parked in the perimeter of these warehouses with a container sitting on top of it. So even the chassis were serving as a makeshift warehouse. So how did the port respond? We responded with 3 major actions. The very first thing we did is we repurposed vacant land, and we made what land we had available at the time, and we activated for the purpose of temporary storage. This image that you see here is located at Pier S at the Port of Long Beach. We started with 17 acres back in 2020, and over time, we incrementally grew it. Today, this site is 100 acres, and it has an annual throughput capacity of 1 million TEU. I can't tell you how important this site has been to provide relief to our terminals, enabling them to process more containers and bring those ships to berth faster. The second thing we did is we expanded hours of operation. And the thinking here was, in the absence of physical capacity, another way we could inject some capacity into the supply chain is by opening earlier, closing later. TTI, one of our terminals in Long Beach, was the first to go 24 hours a day. From September of 2021 through the present day, they're open 24 hours a day, 4 days a week. I wish I could tell you that it's been a huge success, and as a result of this, that operation is at full throttle even at night. But the reality is that the port terminal is just a segment of the supply chain. And the supply chain really is a system of systems. And in order for 24/7 operations to work, there needs to be a transition across every segment of the supply chain so that every segment can also enable every other segment to transition to this 24/7 operation. And as long as the warehouses, as long as the trucking companies and the truck drivers do not fully transition to 24/7, we're not going to maximize that transition. But nonetheless, TTI took the first step. Since then, every other terminal in the ports of Long Beach and Los Angeles have expanded their hours of operation. And I would add that the ILWU workforce has been incredible. Thanks to their cooperation, our port never had to close a single day or a single shift. And the collaboration between our terminals and our ILWU workforce has been truly extraordinary. And I should never overlook the fact that that collaboration, that cooperation has really allowed the ports like ours to be able to implement some of these key initiatives. Finally, the third action we took, and I will say this, not every action we have taken has been very popular. This is probably the least popular. We announced a fee utilizing our tariff that would allow us to charge the ocean carrier for containers they bring into the port that sit on the port terminal 9 days or longer. We call these the long dwell containers. Now, thankfully, we have not had to implement the fee. In other words, we have not had to collect the fee because the ocean carriers and their customers, the beneficial cargo owners, responded. And in fact, when we announced this fee, upwards of 50% of all the containers that were sitting on the terminal had been on terminal 9 days or longer. In response to this announcement of this fee, there was tremendous cooperation between the shipping line, the terminal, and the shipper. And as a result of that, we've had to continue to delay this fee week after week after week. In addition to that, the supply chain crisis and our response to it required that we gather data and information about ships and containers like never before. It's been an extraordinary effort to try to get as much data, as much information to our customers, to the shippers, to our trucking partners, to our rail providers, because what the pandemic did is that it shifted in a very, very aggressive way the movement of containers from across the Pacific to the time the ship arrived at the ports, to the time that those boxes crossed the docks. And so that forced us as a port authority to gather as much information as possible and push it out. The result of that is that you can go to our website any day and gather as much data, as much information that you would need in order to plan your operation and know when to send your truck driver to a specific port terminal to pick up a container or drop off a load. The other result of this is now we have this report, we call it the WAVE report, and it stands for Weekly Advanced Volume Estimates. And this is a weekly report we put out to all of our industry partners that gives them a insight and an opportunity to know what's coming their way so that they can plan their volumes and their operations as well. But the reason I share this with you is because none of this data, and including this report, is enough to really move the needle when it comes to cargo visibility and information sharing. And this is a great segue into what we'd like to present to you today. The Supply Chain Information Highway is a digital initiative. And what this is, it's a way to harness the power of all that data and gather all the data that every segment of the supply chain feeds into the system and make it available to the ultimate shipper, but in addition to them, every single partner across the supply chain. And let me just walk you through. This is your typical vessel operation. And as you can see here on the slide, just in the discharge, unloading of a container ship to get those boxes onto the port yard, port terminal, and have those boxes leave the port terminal either via truck or via rail. Look at all the data feeds that are processed. Look at all the data that's exchanged. Look at all the different modes who have to share that data with each other. It's a very complex process to gather all that data and then use all that data collectively to interpret it to determine when I, as a shipper, for example, will be ready to send in my truck driver to pick up a container or to drop off a load, or I, as a rail operator, to determine how many rail cars I'm going to need on any given week when I send it into a terminal. So as you can see, the lack of visibility and the lack of access to cargo data not only leaves industry partners and the shipper in the dark, but it inhibits them from being able to maximize and optimize their own operations. And that's where the Supply Chain Information Highway comes in. If you look at this slide here, what we intend to do with this piece of digital infrastructure is to leverage all existing mechanisms that transfer data from one mode to the next, gather it all, and then put it in one source, make it accessible so that all the container events that a shipper will need in order to plan their operation, know when to send a truck to collect the container, or know for a rail provider, know when to send in how many rail cars to which terminal. All that data is basically synchronized and put into one common format so that all these industry partners can make those decisions in real time. So having walked you through that process, let me just give you some background on this. The Supply Chain Information Highway is not just another cargo visibility tool. There are many on the market today. We support them all. We think the more visibility, the better. And the more cargo visibility tools in the marketplace, the better. Because ultimately, if we want to move containers with more efficiency and we want to maximize the velocity and reliability of the movement of these containers, we're going to need that data to also be shared, and to be shared seamlessly. What we're building is the infrastructure, and this is why we call it the Information Highway. This is an environment for all authorized supply chain partners to be able to access data in order to increase visibility and delivery. And the way we like to describe it is that it's the liberation of data. It's the liberation of the data. The idea here is to liberate the data. It's to make it available in any given form. And I'll talk a little bit more about the flexibility in a moment. But it's really focused on organizations who are responsible for the movement of containers. So although we have the ultimate customer in mind, which is a beneficial cargo owner, This initiative also helps every industry partner that has a role in the movement of containers from ship to terminal to truck to train and ultimately to the warehouse, the distribution center, and even the store shelf. So the reach is broad. The objective here is very simple. It's end-to-end visibility and eventually coast-to-coast connectivity. And I'll mention a little bit more about that in a second. So here's how I would describe it. If you think of cargo visibility tools that are on the market today, whether it's TradeLens or CargoSmart, if you think of those as cars that carry data, what we're building is the highway. We're building that digital infrastructure that will allow and enable all these different, all these different cars that carry data to travel on one common corridor. And the advantages of doing that are truly game-changing. I mean, when you think about how we can all benefit from having access to data so that we can plan, we can schedule, we can optimize our own supply chains, it really becomes a win-win-win for the shipper, the service providers, and including the ports as well. As ports, I think all of you would agree that we want cargo of all types to cross our docks as quickly as possible. We want throughput to be maximized. We don't win if that cargo just sits there and if that cargo is not moving. And that's what this digital initiative is all about. It's to keep that cargo moving with velocity, with reliability, and giving shippers and every service provider up and down the supply chain that visibility. So let me offer you some examples of how this can be used. It could be used as a data source for a transportation provider's planning, scheduling, or optimizer. And again, all we're trying to do is liberate the data. We're not optimizing the supply chain of individual entities, shippers, or companies. All we want to do is make the data available. And the reason this is important is because each year, our port serves over 200,000 different shippers. And the vast majority of them are very small companies. In fact, in many cases, they're private individuals who route 1 or 2 containers a year. Some of our bigger shippers, like the Walmarts and the Targets and the Home Depots, they have sophisticated systems. They have the resources to be able to provide their own visibility and be able to access the data they need to plan their systems. But the vast majority of our shippers do not have those resources. And so what we intend to do is to make the data available to all, regardless of size, regardless of their level of sophistication. And once they have the data, we want to put them in a position to be able to optimize their own supply chains. So to get that, by providing that information, such as the last event location or the time for a specific container that can be fed into their ERP systems, it increases or decreases the lead time calculations. And that's a huge gain as entities like shippers, for example, plan their operations. From a freight forwarder perspective, the supply chain information highway allows them to gain insight into the last location of a container. And having that information ahead of time allows them to look around the corner and predict when a container is going to be available, and they can plan their operation that way. For the terminal operator, for them, it's critically important that they have visibility into the number of containers that are unloaded from a vessel weeks away versus days away. And I can't tell you how important that was throughout the pandemic. In the year 2020, when the market, when the bottom fell off the market and there was a lot of doom and gloom, that shift from a record number of blank sailings to a record number of ships caught the entire supply chain off guard. In fact, no one was really ready. The railroads, the warehouses, even the shippers who advanced their orders were not ready for that tsunami of cargo that came. And it's that lack of visibility that we're trying to avoid and we're trying to prevent going forward. And then finally, from a warehouse perspective, for a warehouse pickup scheduling person, the supply chain information highway can help them see when a container might be available for pickup at the port. And there again, having that data in advance will put them in a position to optimize their operation. So here is a table that shows very simply what types of data and what types of container events that we're tracking. This is actual data that we started recording in the course of our pilot project that we launched in December of last year and that we concluded at the end of February of this year. And you'll see here that in the one terminal that participated in the pilot program, you'll see the different layers of data, everything from the outgate to when that container was loaded on a train, to the time that the container was released by customs, when it was discharged from the ship. We even incorporated our pilots, and we incorporated their berthing schedule to try to line up their operation with the vessel schedule. So as you can see here, when you start aggregating these different layers of data, it creates this profile that gives you an idea of when that container, all this data relates to, is going to be available and where it's moving from the ship through the port terminal to the train or to the truck and eventually into the hinterland. So this is a chart that I like to use to describe this, because right now a lot of it is conceptual. I know I've said a lot in trying to describe what it is and what it does. This slide right here, I think, shows the flow in a very simple way. So if you look at the middle of the chart, think of that as the supply chain information highway that's backed up by a secure cloud environment. On the left, you see all the data sources. So what we're doing is we're asking the trains, we're asking the ships, we're asking the trucks to feed data about their operations, their equipment. In the case of the railroads, when their trains are headed to the port, in what quantities, how many rail cars. When it relates to the ships, it's about their weekly service deployments, how many ships, what the capacity is on those ships. And then from the trucking side is when that truck driver is going to be scheduling their appointments. So we get an opportunity to ingest all those data points into the secure cloud environment. And then on the right-hand side of the chart is where all that data is then accessed by all the different parties, including the shipper. So by centralizing all these data points in one common place, what we're eliminating is having that shipper go to 5 or 6 or 7, sometimes up to 10 to 12 different websites or different sources just to try to compile all the data they need to create a profile for that container. So as you can see, there's a lot of efficiencies that are gained simply by consolidating the data sets and the data points into one common secure cloud environment. So let me bring this back to the value proposition. So how will this help the supply chain? I think all of you would agree, given our experience over the past 24 months, that data is the most critical cog in the supply chain. If you ask the port envoy, if you ask the Department of Transportation, who have been working very closely with the ports and with the industry and with labor in trying to get us through the supply chain, they will tell you that visibility, data sharing is critical to the success of the overall supply chain. So freeing access to data across multiple industries and then consolidating it into a common format will reduce the cost of visibility. The data can then be used by all supply chain partners. Again, all we're doing is liberating the data. We're not optimizing it for them. Once all the supply chain partners have access to the data, once they retrieve the data, they can then use that to enhance their own planning, their own scheduling, and optimizing their own systems. And the best part is that the Port of Long Beach, thanks to the leadership and support of our Harbor Commission, we recognize the value of initiatives like these. And while we were the port that took the lead and planted the seed behind this initiative that is quickly becoming a national initiative, we don't believe in asking our partners for the data and then charging them for the same data. So we decided to make the initial investment, build the prototype, get it to a place where it can be implemented and scaled up across all of our container terminals. And then we want to make this model available to other ports and other port authorities so that they can replicate it. And then that way, each port across the nation can become an on-ramp to this broader system of highways that we're trying to build. In that regard, I guess we could have called it the supply chain freeway as opposed to the supply chain information highway, but it's too late for that. So we'll move on to the next slide. Some additional benefits. The supply chain information highway helps to eliminate the need to log into multiple stakeholder websites. As I mentioned earlier, today shippers and trucking companies have to go to 6, 7 different websites just to be able to track the status of containers. The information highway consolidates that. It also reduces the amount of data sources and connectors just to get the container event data for a single container. We're also performing normalization across the data because we know that data has to be accurate, it has to be timely, it has to be actionable. It makes no sense to push out data if it's not accurate. And so part of this process over time will also involve ways to make sure that that data is normalized, make sure it's consistent, make sure that it's standardized, so that that data, when it makes its way from node to node and segment to segment, can be funneled and accessed in a single standard format. And then finally, we're turning non-event data, such as the pilot schedules, as I referenced them earlier, into events that can also help inform the status and time of container movements. Believe it or not, there's a cadence to the movement of containers from the time a ship enters our channel to the time that container crosses the docks. And that's where the pilot schedules, once we incorporate that data point, can help us forecast and predict when a container might become available once it's discharged. Next, let me talk a little bit about the key takeaways. This is not a one-size-fits-all optimizer or dashboard. In fact, it's a data service that's accessible by an API. That's an automatic program interface. And for those of you who are not familiar with APIs, it's a seamless way to get data by connecting the operating systems of 2 different entities. Supply chain partners can use the data to customize and apply data in their own way. Again, this is about maximum flexibility. We want to help the big retailers, but we also want to help the mom and pop shops who don't have the sophisticated resource or the resources or the sophistication to optimize their own platforms. And then finally, the data sharing participants will have their own proprietary data. It's going to be protected. Security, data security is critical. And the consultant that we brought on board, their name is Uncommon. They're based in St. Louis. They have deep Department of Defense experience. They have maritime and port experience, military experience. And they've helped us design this with data security at the center of this initiative. And so finally, let me just wrap up by sharing some of the results from phase 1. We completed phase 1 in about 5 months. And over that time, with 1 terminal and 2 shipping lines, we registered over 700,000 data files. And there were numerous API connections that we established between nodes. That represents about 710 gigabytes of data collected. I don't know how many of you know about gigabytes, but that's a ton of laptops or computers you would need just to be able to process all that data. And as you can see there, look at that second to last bullet point, over 22 million container events. And again, this was just 1 container terminal in a period of 5 months. So again, this shows that the way that we have designed this, the architecture behind this shows that it does enable the flow of data. And so in phase 2, our board just approved phase 2 for us. What we're going to do there is we're going to scale up from 1 terminal to all 6 container terminals in Long Beach. And that will allow us to engage all of our shipping line partners, as well as our 2 Class 1 railroads, our short line provider, and many, many, many of our trucking companies. And this is really going to move the needle when it comes to data sharing and information sharing. And then finally, as I mentioned a moment ago, we envision this becoming a national highway, right? As much as we want this to be 100% successful in Long Beach, we know that the only way for the supply chain informational highway to be fully successful is that if it touches and reaches every region of the US. And for that reason, we're very proud that in the time that we have been working on this initiative, the Port of Oakland, the Northwest Seaport Alliance, the Utah Inland Port Authority, Port Miami, and more recently, the South Carolina Ports Authority have all agreed to join us and to become partners with us. And again, the ultimate vision is not just end-to-end visibility across the supply chain, but eventually coast-to-coast connectivity. And having these ports as partners is going to help us get there. So with that, ladies and gentlemen, I thank you again for your time. I'm happy to answer any questions. And again, Jane, thank you so much for the invitation.
Thank you very much, Noel. This is the time for questions. I don't know. I think there's microphones somewhere. If anyone has any questions, now I'll kind of get them started. Supply chain information highway different from cargo that for users.
So your feed is
Hey, no, maybe while we're waiting for them to figure it out, I do have a question. There are a number of additional products on the market already that are doing similar. How does yours differ from those other products? And how do you get that buy-in from all the other ports that are already started down that path?
Yeah, thanks for the question, Jane. You know, as I try to describe, if you think of these cargo visibility tools that already exist, and even those that will emerge in the future, whether it's TradeLens or CargoSmart, just to name a few, if you think of those as cars that carry data, what we're building is the highway. We're building that digital infrastructure that will enable all these different cargo visibility tools and their data to basically travel on one common corridor. And the way that we're engaging other port authorities is the way that we designed this is that every other port authority will have its own data environment, which will serve as its own on-ramp. And that connectivity, Jane, the ability for different ports to retain their own data environment and at the same time enable their customers to access data from other gateways is of incredible value for them. And the reason is because we all share the same customers, right? It's virtually the same shipping lines. In many cases, it's the same shippers. So having that connectivity also enables that end-to-end visibility.
So will there be a specific interface that people would have to download to access this, like a browser of some sort?
Yes, for those who don't have the sophisticated IT resources, for example, Jane, we will have a website, if you will, that folks will be able to go to, type in the container information and access their own data. And of course, that entire process will be data secure. The data security is going to be paramount, and it's all going to be matched according to their profile. So we'll make it as simple for those who don't have the sophisticated systems, and the data will be as extensive for those who do have the sophisticated IT systems.
Sounds great. Sorry, jump back over to the conference.
Hello, Noel, can you hear me?
Yes, hi.
Hi, my name is Conrad Mack, and I'm with Consberg. I'll be speaking up a bunch, but your presentation was great. The pilot has been focused on containers. So I have two questions. Do you see an opportunity for shippers that are shipping bulk? And the second question is, do you see a potential to expand to optimize loads based on data that would indicate safe depth under keel?
Conrad, thank you for your question. The short answer is yes. Obviously, we're starting with containers because that's the focus of the administration. That's the focus of our port. although we are a diversified port. But once we build out and we define the architecture and we define the processes, this can totally be applied to other forms of cargoes. In fact, I can tell you that there are a number of port authorities in the US who are break bulk ports that see a lot of value in this. So my guess is over time, as we build this out for container cargoes, this is something we can certainly expand for other types of cargoes.
Thank you. We were a little late getting started. Is there time for one more question? If there is one before we move on? Nobody's saying no, so we'll take one more question. Hello, sir.
Hi.
I'm Marlene from the Port American Samoa. And I really enjoyed the presentation, and it's very clear to us as well. My question is, because we are out in the Pacific and we get a lot of cargo inland, it's either truck or rail to Port of Beach. Will that information be available to us when we want to search? Because for a container coming from Port of Long Beach or Oakland, it won't be available to us within 2 weeks or prior to the vessel's arrival. So if I wanted to track something, will this be available for us to track inland or rail or truck to Port of Long Beach?
Thank you for your question, and thanks for your kind comment. If I understood your question correctly, eventually the information highway will track a container from the port of origin all the way to its ultimate destination. So in that regard, it will have the ability over time, as we bring the different partners in, to track that container all the way inland. And that's the goal, right? And this is why we're reaching out to other ports. In fact, even the Utah Inland Port Authority is an example, and all the different service providers that connect the different port authorities, including the railroads, the trucking companies, the freight forwarders, the NVOs. So the short answer is yes. I mean, eventually that end-to-end visibility is what we're striving to achieve.
One more question, please. If a bill of lading or booking number is unavailable at the time of tracking, will it also be available tracking via serial number?
Yes. What we would like to see, and of course, a lot of that will depend on how comfortable partners are in sharing their information. Right now, we've been very fortunate in the pilot project. All the partners have been willing to do so. But assuming over time, the partners are going to continue to share that data, the way we design this is for maximum flexibility. So whether it's the bill of lading or the container number, we want to gather as many data points so that each shipper can build a profile based on the aggregate data that will allow them to track the container.
Great, thank you.
You're welcome.
Thank you so much, Noel. We really appreciate that. Let's give him a round of applause.
Thank you very much. Really appreciate the opportunity to spend some time with all of you. Enjoy the rest of your stay.